Hello retro gamers and welcome to my first peripheral review. Today we're checking out the Super Game Boy, released in 1994 for the Super Nintendo and the Super Famicom. The Super Game Boy allows Game Boy games to be played on your TV, which is great for YouTubers like myself who want to record footage. But of course, it's fantastic from a collector's standpoint as well. There are plenty of great games in the Game Boy's library, and playing through your TV instead of on a 2-inch screen and without relying on batteries certainly has its advantages. The Super Game Boy is super easy to use. I love writing scripts late at night. All you honestly have to do is shove your favorite Game Boy cartridge into the Super Game Boy slot, and then shove that into your SNES or Super Famicom. Turn on your SNES and voila, go to town. Your Super Game Boy is compatible with any Game Boy cartridge and the Game Boy camera, but not all Game Boy Color games because they simply don't exist yet as far as the Super Game Boy is concerned. I've read that black Game Boy cartridges are supposed to work in monochrome compatibility mode, but I have a few of these and not all of them work. For example, V-Rally refuses to play, which actually makes perfect sense when you take a look at the cartridge. It actually says only for Game Boy Color on the label, yet it is a black cartridge, so it sort of throws the idea out of the window. However, other black cartridges like Link's Awakening and Conker's Pocket Tales work perfectly fine, so be sure to check the label before playing. You can be assured though that none of the transparent Game Boy Color cartridges work. If you want to play those on a TV, you'll need a Game Boy player for the GameCube.
So now that I've talked about how you actually use the Super Game Boy, I thought I'll talk a bit about how it actually works. Now believe it or not, there's no sort of software emulation at all, which is what I originally thought was the case when I first got it. It's not just a big glorified adapter. On the inside of the Super Game Boy, there's actually basically half the innards of an actual Game Boy. So really, the cartridge goes in there, it plays through this, and then basically the SNES is only used for its controller output and for the lines going to the TV. It's quite amazing really. So I'm just going to open this up and show it to you. Obviously don't open it up like I have if you're not very good with electronics, because I'm not very good with electronics, but I'm doing this for the good of the video. We'll get that out of the way. You do need a special adapter to open it up, just so you know. So you can buy them online quite easy. I bought mine years ago. But anyway, so over here we have the CPU, and it's actually the exact same CPU that you'll find in just any old Game Boy. And up here we also have two 64K RAM chips, which are also the same RAM chips you'll find in your Game Boy. So basically you've got your CPU and your RAM, so everything on the Game Boy side is basically covered. So when you have a look at these chips, it's a bit more interesting. Now over here, I've had a look around on the internet and they're led to believe that it's just a ROM chip. So my guess is that it has basically all the software that plays when you plug it into your SNES. So like where you can change the overlay colors, or where you can change the borders, the control schemes, create your own borders. I think all of that's contained in that ROM chip. Because basically it has traces just going to the SNES side of things. Over here though, people aren't quite sure what this chip is. It has traces going to the SNES and the CPU. So in my guess, I think it's what it does. Sort of tripping over my own words here as per usual when I don't have a script. But basically, I think it tells the SNES to use its controllers and to use its TV output, when then it has the CPU and the RAM to actually generate the gameplay of the Game Boy cartridge you have. Anyway, that's just my guess. I'm not very good with electronics. I'm really just talking out of my ass. But yeah. And this last chip over here is the most interesting of them all, this really small one. People on the internet actually reckon this is a region lockout chip, which is quite interesting because the Game Boy is actually region free. You can actually play, Japanese cartridges in your Australian Game Boy. It doesn't really matter. Obviously, the SNES is region locked, but mostly that has to do with the shapes of the cartridges being a little bit different, although they do have this chip in them as well to lock it to a region. And what people do is they deactivate these chips by desoldering them, I think, so then they can play any game in the world. So yeah, I'm not quite sure why that is on this, if that is what it is, but yeah, interesting nonetheless.
The Super Game Boy adds a few other features as you play too, which can be accessed by an on-screen menu that appears when you hold down the two back triggers. You can change the background that appears, with the default being specific to the game you're playing if it's supported. Otherwise, there's a handful built in, like one that represents an actual Game Boy, or cats. You also have the choice between two controller configurations, although the default one is the best in my opinion. This one best represents the actual button layout on a Game Boy. You can also choose which colors you want to overlay the gameplay if there aren't any specifically for that game in the Super Game Boy 2. I feel it's best to keep to monochrome though, otherwise you're missing out on what the game is really supposed to look like. Plus, it could make Donkey Kong appearing like he's having a super bad trip. Otherwise, if you do create a color scheme you're particularly attached to, the game generates a password that can be entered every time you play to recreate it. There is also a menu option that allows you to create your own borders. This doesn't work too badly, although it's quite hard to draw diagonal lines. You can use the SNES mouse however, which may make it easier, although I don't have one to test myself sadly. It's all a bit of fun though, I guess, although unfortunately you can't save your mad-ass creations. Other Game Boy games took further advantage of the extra hardware too. Games like Donkey Kong and Kirby Dream Land 2 have expanded sound, and a few others like Killer Instinct and Wario Blast even add an option for multiplayer. In 1998, the Super Game Boy 2 was released, but only in Japan and on the Super Famicom. The rest of the world wasn't missing out on too much though, as the only added features was a link port, LED indicators, it had 8 new borders, and it was in transparent casing. I guess that was a cool thing at the time. In 2003, there was also an add-on released for the GameCube called the Game Boy Player. However, any Super Game Boy enhancements are sadly ignored when played through the Game Boy Player, but nonetheless, I really want one. Anyway, the Super Game Boy retailed for $60 in America and £50 in the UK, which probably meant it cost about $300 in Australia at the time. Considering that though, the Super Game Boy now goes for fairly cheap. As of recording this video, it goes for about $30 online. I swear I only paid about $15 maybe a year and a half ago though, so maybe it's increasing in price. But I would recommend this for any Game Boy collector.